The cake hit him square in the face, and the whole ballroom laughed. 200 people in tuxedos and gowns, some already filming with their phones, some just doubled over. The woman who threw it was still holding the empty tiered platter, her mouth open in a mean triumphant laugh, her husband beside her clapping like a boy at a magic trick. The single dad in the borrowed suit didn't move. He didn't wipe his face. He didn't yell. He stood there while frosting slid down his shirt collar and dripped onto the polished floor. And he opened his eyes and he looked at her. Slow. Steady. The laughter around him started to die when they saw his face. Nobody who mattered had noticed him walk in. His name was Ethan Ward. And they had no idea who really stood in front of them. Stay with me on this one. Let me tell you who Ethan Ward was before that Saturday night. Ethan was 34 years old, and he had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, and she was the whole reason he got up in the morning. His wife Rachel had died 3 years back. Cancer. Fast, brutal, the kind that gives you 6 weeks between the diagnosis and the funeral. Ethan had been 31, and he'd gone into that hospital room a husband and come out a widower, and he'd walked into his own kitchen the next morning and found Lily eating cereal at the counter for years old, and she'd looked up and said, "Is mommy home yet?" And Ethan had understood in that moment that his life was over as a life he ran for himself. From that moment forward it was Lily's life, and he was the man who kept it standing. He'd done it. That was the piece nobody knew. Ethan had done the hardest thing a young man can do. He'd shown up. Every single day for 3 years. He'd made the lunches and done the pigtails and been at every parent-teacher conference, and sat through the school play 3 times because Lily had one line. He'd cried into a dish towel at 2 in the morning after she was asleep, and then he'd washed his face and gone to bed and gotten up and done it again. Here's the thing people didn't know about Ethan Ward. His wife Rachel had come from money. Not showy money. Old quiet money. Her family had built a large manufacturing company 2 generations back, and when Rachel's father died, she'd inherited the majority silent share of the holding company that owned it. She'd been the only child. When Rachel died, that share had gone to Ethan, in trust for Lily until she was 25, with Ethan as her guardian and administrator. Ethan was, on paper, the majority silent shareholder of a holding company with over 3,000 employees. He'd never touched it. He'd never sat on a board. He'd never gone to a shareholder meeting. He'd kept the same job he'd had before Rachel died, project manager at a small architecture firm, drove the same used SUV, lived in the same modest house Rachel had bought them before she got sick. He didn't want the money. He wanted Lily to have a father who cooked her breakfast, not a father in a boardroom in a different city. The lawyers who managed the trust for him understood this. They sent him quarterly reports. He filed them. But 3 days before the gala, something had come in the mail that Ethan couldn't file. An envelope. Handwritten address. No return. Inside was a printed sheaf of documents and a single note from a person who signed only their initials. The documents were internal financial records from Meridian Industrial, the largest company inside Rachel's family's holding. The person who'd sent them was an accountant inside Meridian who'd figured out what the executives were doing. Meridian was about to lay off 130 employees at their Ohio plant. Publicly, the story was budget pressure. Privately, according to the documents, the layoff was designed to trigger a bonus structure that would pay the CEO and his top 4 executives a combined $38 million in performance incentives. The layoffs weren't necessary. Meridian was profitable. The executives had engineered the numbers to look like they weren't, so that when they announced the cuts and the stock ticked up, they could cash out. 130 families were going to lose their livelihoods, so 5 men could buy summer houses. The whistleblower's note ended with a single line. "I don't know who you are, Mr. Ward, but you're the only person on the ownership side who might listen." Ethan had read the documents twice, and he had put Lily to bed, and he had sat on his back steps with a cup of coffee gone cold, and he had thought about it for 2 nights. He had never used the position Rachel had left him. He'd promised himself he never would. But somebody had asked. And it wasn't about him. The gala on Saturday was Meridian's annual black tie fundraiser. Every executive would be there. Every board member. The CEO's wife, who was famously the real force behind her husband's rise, would be running the room. It was the one place Ethan could look them in the eye before he decided anything. He'd asked a friend from his old firm who did some corporate work to get him in on a +1. He'd borrowed a suit from a neighbor. He'd told Lily he had a work dinner, and Lily had put a paper heart in his pocket and told him to come home safe. And Ethan Ward had driven across town on a Saturday night to a ballroom full of people who had no idea who he was and, more importantly, no idea who Rachel Ward's daughter was. He walked into that room in a suit that didn't quite fit, at a table near the back, alone. That was the mistake the CEO's wife made. She saw a man who didn't belong, and she decided he'd make good entertainment. The gala was in full swing when Ethan sat down. Round tables, white flowers, champagne towers, the whole show. His table was toward the back, near the kitchen doors. The other guests at it barely looked at him. He was the fill-in. The nobody. He nodded politely and picked at the salad and watched the room. Up at the head table, he could see them. Bradford Callahan, CEO of Meridian, mid-50s, laughing loud enough to be heard 3 tables over. His wife Vivian beside him in a deep green gown, blonde and glittering, holding the room the way she was known to hold rooms. Around them, the 4 executives whose names were on the whistleblower documents in Ethan's pocket. All of them together at one table. All of them planning to be $38 million richer by Christmas. Ethan watched them for a while. He didn't feel angry. That was the strange part. He felt very quiet. He'd learned since Rachel died that anger burns you out and doesn't fix anything. What he felt was more like the way you feel when you've made up your mind about a hard thing and you're just waiting to do it. He was about to get up and go find some air when Vivian Callahan crossed the room and stopped at his table. She had a small entourage with her. 2 other women, Bradford's junior executive, and a photographer. She was smiling. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice was pitched to Carrie. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Whose table did you say you were at?" Ethan set down his fork. He said his friend's name quietly. Said he was a fill-in. Vivian's smile got wider. She turned to her entourage. She said, loud enough for the tables around them, "Oh, a fill-in. Isn't that lovely?" She looked Ethan up and down, at the borrowed suit that fit wrong at the shoulders, at the shoes that hadn't been polished. She said, "Well, we do try to make room for everyone." The women around her laughed the way people laugh when they know they're supposed to. Ethan didn't respond. He knew what this was. He'd seen it before, in small ways his whole life. He was going to be tonight's amusement. The awkward outsider Vivian would work over for a few minutes to entertain the room. He decided he'd let her have her 90 seconds, and then he'd leave. He had what he needed. He'd seen their faces. He didn't need to fight in a ballroom. Vivian circled his chair. She asked him what he did. He said he was a project manager. She said, "Oh, a project manager, imagine that. Do you like it?" She was doing a voice now, the one people do when they're mocking somebody in front of a crowd, but pretending to be interested. Ethan gave her plain, quiet answers. He didn't play along and he didn't get mad. That should have been the end of it. But Vivian Callahan had been doing this her whole adult life, and she could feel that her audience wasn't quite there yet. She needed the room. She stepped back to a nearby table, and she picked up something that had just been brought out, and Ethan later thought that she must have been planning it from the moment she stood up. Because it was too easy, too fast the way she moved. It was one of the little tiered display cakes, meant to be cut in the ceremony an hour from now. Vivian lifted it off its stand. She held it up. She said loud, "Oh, I have such a wonderful welcome for our special guest." And before Ethan could do anything at all, she brought the whole thing down into his face. The cake hit hard, frosting up his nose, in his eyes, down his shirt. The empty platter clattered onto the table. The ballroom did what ballrooms do when the woman running the room breaks the 4th wall. Half of them laughed on cue, delighted, thrilled to be in on it. The other half, the ones with better instincts, sat there with their mouths open. A few phones came up. Vivian was already laughing, big and rich, her hand on Bradford's arm now because he'd come to see what the fuss was, and Bradford, when he saw what she'd done, laughed too. Loudly. Encouraging. Ethan Ward sat perfectly still. Frosting slid down his collar. Cake slid off his shoulder onto the floor. He did not wipe his face. He did not stand up in a rage. He did not shout. He kept his eyes closed for one long breath, and then he opened them. He looked at Vivian. He did not look angry. That was the part that started slowly, to make the laughter around them die. He looked at her the way a man looks at a person he has just made a decision about. Calm. Focused. Almost sad. And then, without saying a word yet, Ethan Ward reached into the inside pocket of his borrowed jacket, and he took out his phone, and he began to type. The room was watching now. All of it. Even Vivian's smile started to falter a little, because a man you have just publicly humiliated is not supposed to sit calmly and type on his phone. He is supposed to yell or leave. Ethan did neither. He typed for perhaps 20 seconds, careful, deliberate, ignoring the frosting on his face. Then he put the phone on the table screen down. He picked up his cloth napkin. He wiped his eyes. He wiped his mouth. He set the napkin down folded neatly. He looked up at Vivian Callahan and her husband and the 4 executives from the head table who had wandered over to see the show. And Ethan Ward said, quiet, his voice barely above the volume of a normal conversation, "We need to talk." He could have walked out then. He could have gone home to Lily with cake on his shirt and a story to tell. Nobody in that room would have blamed him. He would have been the man who took the hit and had the dignity to leave. It would have been the safe end of it. He did not walk out. If you're still with me this far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this won't only reach people because folks like you stay till the end. It means more than you know. Vivian Callahan was still trying to hold her smile together. Her husband Bradford, less experienced at this than his wife, had already stopped smiling entirely. There was something in the way the strange man in the borrowed suit had said we need to talk that had made a room full of powerful people go quiet. Ethan Ward wiped one more streak of frosting from his temple. He said to Bradford calmly, "Mr. Callahan, my name is Ethan Ward." Bradford's face did nothing for a full 3 seconds. Then something moved behind his eyes. He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. It was on his own paperwork, on documents he had signed 100 times. It was the name of the trustee behind the majority silent share in the parent company that owned Meridian. Bradford Callahan had never met the man. Nobody at Meridian had ever met the man. The trustees behind the ownership had been silent for so long that most of the executives thought of the position as an inherited abstraction. A ghost in the paperwork. But Bradford Callahan knew the name. And his face went the color of raw dough. Vivian did not know the name. She saw her husband's face change and she said, "Sharp, Brad." "Brad, what?" Bradford couldn't speak. Ethan spoke for him. "Mrs. Callahan," Ethan said, still calm, still quiet, "my late wife was Rachel Ward. Her father was Charles Merrick. I hold the trust that owns the majority stake in the parent company of Meridian Industrial, in trust for my daughter. I have never used my position. Not once. My wife made me promise I never would unless I had to." Ethan looked down at his cake-covered shirt. Then back at Vivian. "I got a package in the mail 3 days ago," he said. "From an accountant at Meridian who cannot go public because they will lose their family's insurance if they do. That package contains internal records showing that the layoffs your husband is about to announce at the Ohio plant are engineered to trigger a bonus structure worth $38 million for him and the 4 gentlemen standing behind you. 130 people will lose their jobs on a manufactured pretext so that 5 men can enrich themselves. My wife's family built that company. Her grandfather started it. He would have burned the whole thing down before he let it be run this way." The ballroom was silent now. The word silent does not quite cover it. 200 people were holding their breath at the same time. Ethan turned his phone over. He glanced at it. "I came here tonight," he continued, still in that same quiet voice, "to look at your husband's face before I decided what to do. I did not intend to say anything. I intended to go home to my daughter and think for another day. I did not intend to make a scene. But then you made a scene of me, ma'am. And you filmed it. And a lot of other people filmed it. And I've had about 20 seconds to reconsider my plan." He picked up his phone. 90 seconds ago, he said, "I sent a message to the 3 other trustees on my daughter's trust and to the legal counsel for the holding company. I asked them to convene an emergency board call in the next 30 minutes. I told them what I was about to do. They have all confirmed." He set the phone down again. "Mr. Callahan," Ethan said, "the layoffs are canceled. As of now. You will not announce them Monday. You will not announce them ever. The bonus structure that would have paid you $38 million has been suspended pending a full independent audit. Ms. Callahan, please tell your husband to sit down, because his knees do not look good." Bradford Callahan did not sit down. He stared at Ethan Ward with his mouth slightly open. Vivian, who was still holding the empty cake platter without seeming to know she was holding it, made a small sound in her throat that was not a word. Ethan stood up from his chair. He was not tall or broad or intimidating in any physical way. He was a tired 34-year-old widower in a borrowed suit with cake in his hair. But something in the way he stood in that ballroom now made him the biggest man in the room by a lot. "I want to be clear about something," he said, and this time his voice carried, because he was not just speaking to the Callahans. He was speaking to the 200 people watching. "I do not enjoy this. I did not want this. I promised my wife I would never use this position. She would be sorrier than any of you tonight to see me using it. But she also raised a woman named Lily Ward who is 7 years old and asleep in her bed right now with a nightlight. And Lily's great-grandfather built a company on the idea that his workers were his family. I have to look Lily in the eye tomorrow morning. And the day after that. For the rest of my life. So I do not have the luxury of pretending I didn't see what's in that envelope." He looked at Bradford Callahan directly. "By Monday morning," he said, "you will resign. All 5 of you. Your bonuses for the last 3 fiscal years will be clawed back to the extent the law allows, pending the audit. I will be recommending to the board that a criminal referral be made regarding the manufactured financial documents. I am, as of this weekend, no longer a silent shareholder. Whether I like it or not." He looked at Vivian one last time. He did not raise his voice. "Ma'am," he said, "the cake was fine. You didn't need to hit me with it. I was going to leave." Then Ethan Ward turned, picked up his jacket, walked between the frozen tables full of frozen guests, and left the ballroom with cake still drying in his hair. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Somebody's phone, forgotten in a shaking hand, was still recording. By Sunday morning, the video was everywhere. The version that spread was not the one Vivian Callahan had wanted. Somebody at a nearby table had started filming when she picked up the platter and had kept filming through everything after. And by dawn the phrase "quiet single dad" had become a hashtag, and by noon the whole story was on the national news. Meridian's stock, which had been set to pop on the layoff announcement, dropped 17% when the markets opened Monday. Bradford Callahan's resignation letter was on the board chair's desk by 9 that morning. All 4 executives followed by end of day. The Ohio plant kept every single one of its 130 jobs. The audit found more than the whistleblower had. A pattern going back 6 years of exactly the kind of self-dealing the layoff had been the crowning example of. Some of it looked criminal. Some of it went to prosecutors. Bradford Callahan and one of the other executives were charged the following spring. Vivian was not charged with anything, because throwing a cake at a stranger is not a crime, but her name was in every article, and the wife of the disgraced CEO had a hard time getting into rooms she used to run. Ethan Ward did not do any interviews. He did not go on any morning shows. He was asked by every major outlet in the country, and he politely declined all of them. He said, when pressed by one reporter he could not politely dodge, that he had done what a man does when he sees 130 people about to be cheated. He said, I don't want to be famous for that. I want it to be normal to do that. That was the only quote he gave. He went back to his job at the architecture firm. He kept the same used SUV. He kept the modest house. He did make one change to his life around ownership, which is that he agreed, quietly, to sit on the board of the holding company from now on. Not as an active manager. As a check. The trust attorney explained to him gently that he could not, in good conscience, walk away again after what had happened, and Ethan agreed. He served for the rest of Lily's minor years, and he was, by all accounts, a boring board member. He voted for boring conservative things. He asked questions when workers were involved. That was it. It was, he thought, exactly what Rachel would have wanted from him. The whistleblower was found. Or they found Ethan. An accountant named Denise Park, 41 years old, mother of 2. She had been terrified she would lose her job over what she'd done. Ethan made sure she didn't. He also made sure, quietly, that her family had a college fund set up for her kids, which he arranged through the trust so it never touched his own wallet, and which Denise didn't learn about for 2 years. There is more to Denise Park's story that deserves telling, because it changes the shape of what happened. Denise had been a mid-level accountant at Meridian for 11 years. She was the kind of employee nobody notices. She came in at 7:30, she left at 5, she was quietly the best forensic mind in the finance department, and she had watched Bradford Callahan's inner circle do smaller versions of the layoff scheme 3 separate times over the years, each one more brazen than the last. Each time she had told her direct supervisor. Each time her supervisor had told her to leave it alone. And Denise, who had a husband on disability and 2 kids in school and health insurance she could not afford to lose, had left it alone. She could not leave the Ohio plant alone. Her mother had worked that plant for 22 years before she retired. Denise had grown up on the pay of that plant. When she saw the numbers on the layoff document, the ones her supervisors had signed off on, she went home and she sat at her kitchen table, and she wept, because her whole professional life had been quietly deciding that she would let bad men do bad things so that her kids would keep their doctor. That was the night she pulled the file. She copied it. She mailed it, hand-addressed, to Ethan Ward at an address she found in an old shareholder registry, an address she was not even sure was still his, and she waited for a knock on her door that would end her career. The knock never came. What came instead, a week after the gala, was a letter from the office of the newly reorganized Meridian Legal Counsel offering her, unsolicited, the position of Deputy Chief of Internal Audit, with a salary that quadrupled hers, and a written contract clause that guaranteed her against retaliation for any reporting she had done or would do in the future. Denise Park read that letter 3 times in her kitchen, and then she went into her bedroom and shut the door and cried for the 2nd time in 1 month, this time for the opposite reason. She never met Ethan Ward until a full year after the gala. He came to the plant to sit in on a workers' meeting, and he asked to be introduced to her privately in a small office off the plant floor. He was in the same used SUV. He was wearing what looked like the same shoes. And he shook her hand and he said, Ms. Park, thank you. My daughter's whole inheritance kept its meaning because of you. Everything you did was the right thing. Everything you were afraid of was reasonable. And you should not have had to do it alone. Denise Park started crying again. Ethan waited. He was very patient with people who cried. When she could talk, she asked him why he had done it that way. Publicly. In front of 200 people, with cake on his face. Why he had not just gone through lawyers. Ethan said, I thought about it. But I understood something standing in that ballroom with frosting in my eyes. If I did it privately, they would have negotiated. There would have been a settlement. Something would have leaked. Something would have been walked back. The bonus structure would have been adjusted, not killed. The layoffs would have been delayed, not canceled. Somebody 2 years from now would be doing the same thing to a different plant. He looked at her. Sometimes you have to break a thing in front of everyone, so it stays broken. Denise thought about that for a long time after he left. She had done 30 years of quiet work watching men do quiet things, and one night at a gala, a stranger had made all of it, all the quiet, careful things, impossible to do quietly anymore. She wrote it down in a journal she kept. She told her daughters about it when they were older. Both of them went into accounting themselves. Both of them said it was because of what their mother had done at a kitchen table one night, and what a stranger in a borrowed suit had done with what she'd sent him. That was the piece of it Ethan did not know about until much later, when Denise sent him a Christmas card 10 years down the road that ended with the line, "My girls became accountants because of you, and they are going to be the honest kind." Ethan sat at his kitchen table with that card and cried a little for the first time in a very long while. That was the closest he ever came to understanding what he had actually done that Saturday night. It wasn't the 130 jobs. Those had been the goal. It was the accountant at a kitchen table and her daughters watching her, and their daughters after them. A ripple that would keep going long after any of them were gone. Lily grew up. She was 7 when it happened. She was in middle school when she asked her father, one night at dinner, why kids at school kept saying he was a cake guy. Ethan sat her down and told her the whole story. He told her about her mother's family and the company and the layoffs. He told her about Vivian Callahan and the platter and what he had said, and why he had said it. Lily listened, and when he was done, she thought about it, and she said, "Dad, would you have done it if it was only about you?" Ethan considered his daughter for a long time. He said, "Honey, if it had only been about me, I would have gone home and taken a shower and forgotten about it. Some things about me, you don't have to defend. But when it's about other people, and they can't fight for themselves, and you go do it. That's the whole difference." Lily thought about that too. Then she said, "Dad, next time can I come with you?" Ethan laughed, the first real laugh either of them had heard from him in a long while. And he said, "Honey, I really hope there is no next time. But if there is, you can come." Lily Ward grew up quiet and thoughtful and steady. She went to college. She worked one summer at the Ohio plant on the line, because she wanted to know what her great-grandfather had built. She met the workers her father had saved that Saturday night, most of whom were still there, and one of them, a woman named Marta, cried when she shook Lily's hand and said, "Honey, tell your daddy we still say his name." Ethan lived a long, quiet life. He never remarried. He had chances, and he thought about it, but he had made his peace with being one thing very well instead of two things half. He was Lily's father. That was the shape of his life, and he loved it. When she got married in her 20s, he walked her down the aisle in a suit that fit him properly this time, and he did not cry until the reception, when he stood up to give his speech and looked at his daughter and understood that Rachel had gotten to see, somehow, from wherever she was, that he had done the job. Sometimes you take a cake in the face at a fancy party. Sometimes what you do next is quiet and simple and true. And sometimes it saves 130 families you never met. And a little girl at home learns, without being told directly, what a father is for. Ethan Ward went home from that gala with cake in his hair and frosting on a borrowed suit. He also went home the biggest man in a room full of people who had thought he was nothing. They should have looked closer.